Good evening. As campaigning intensifies in the remaining hours until polling, we focus on Shetland as the candidates for the constituency, which was one of the least enthusiastic for devolution, come on board the race for Holyrood and debate the issues. And we take counsel of the other Scottish vote as the electorate prepares to vote a third way. If one thing could have been predicted about May 6th, it was the new voting system would make the outcome less than predictable. With growing excitement over an uncertain result, the parties are making a final push to squeeze a week's electioneering into the next 24 hours. With the nation now plastered with election posters and just 2 more campaigning days to go until the close of polls, all of the parties are taking to the street in a last-minute push for votes. Almost 1,000 candidates are battling for the 129 seats, while party activists are out in force on a canvassing frenzy, relentlessly hoping to transform the elusive floating voters into party supporters. The academics would maintain the die is now cast.
Very few people will actually change their minds now. I'm sure that even the undecideds, and they've reduced in number, have finally more or less decided what to do. So it's making sure that your vote goes and vote. The turnout could be absolutely crucial on Thursday.
And democracy, particularly with proportional representation, always has a price, with this particular election estimated to cost £4.5 million. The logistics behind organising an entire nation into selecting its leaders are impressive, with around 18,000 people working through the night to ensure Scotland will have a result when it wakes in the morning.
We started back in November, and we'll be working right through probably till November this year. We're talking about basically a year. But of course the culmination is this week. We have 1,200 staff involved on Thursday and Friday, 700 during the day attending to the public as they vote, 500 at the counting that evening.
So as the Scots exercise their democratic rights for the first time in a flutter of peach and lilac, it remains to be seen just how many of the electorate will support their old party colours. One of the issues of Vote 99 has been education, and in particular tuition fees. So how has this election been received on the campus? We spent a day at Dundee University, which has a reputation for strong student politics.
So I'm not going to ask any individual here to define it, because psychologists have been trying to define it for 100 years. And there is still no agreed definition. So
at Dundee University, the politics department teaches a wide range of subject areas, but this year in particular what we've noticed is there's been tremendous interest in Scottish politics.
This will actually be my first time voting. I'm very sure about what I actually do in the booth. I know I've got my constituency MSP and my list MSP, and I'll be voting for the same party in both.
It's been quite a good campaign. I think the interest has built up throughout the period, and now there's quite a lot of people talking and getting quite excited for May the 6th.
The major issues are tuition fees, whether or not students should be paying them. Obviously Labour having introduced the tuition fees, and the other parties on the whole saying that they'll abolish them. That's a major issue, but then also the maintenance grants. Students having to pay for their own maintenance as well as their fees. It's just not acceptable.
I think it's fair to say that MSPs will be more sensitive to Scottish needs than has been the case at Westminster. All too often on issues like fisheries, we've seen it highlighted as an issue for the southwest of England and not really for the northeast of Scotland.
Dundee University has got a really strong debating union, both outside of the university throughout the UK, but also more importantly within the Students' Association here. We have regular political debates, just encouraging some discussion, which is obviously very important regarding the oncoming Scottish elections.
Well, thanks a lot for coming along, everybody, and welcome to the Dundee University Students' Association.
Don't you think that's the wrong attitude to take? Don't you think that's the attitude that Mrs Thatcher took and that the Conservative government took when they saw that the health service was in dire straits, perhaps due to the bad planning of previous governments? When they saw that situation, what they didn't do was ask the people if they wanted to save it. What they didn't do was look for the public money to save it.
One of the questions that I would like to ask is with regard to drugs in Scotland. Not just within Dundee, but with Scotland as a whole. I'm somebody who comes from Fraser. I am a Brother.
Now, it's something that's a huge problem in Fraserburgh, but it's not just something that anybody can put down to poverty. What are any of the parties going to do to try and solve this problem?
Students in occupation now at Sussex University, who are in occupation right now as we speak, are fighting the right way to beat fees, and that the way to actually pay for a free education system, like Harvey says, is to tax the rich.
In the 1997 devolution referendum, Shetland was one of the least enthusiastic constituencies. But will the islands getting their own MSP rather than sharing with Orkney warm the Northern Isles' attitude to Holyrood? Helga Meller reports.
Up Heliar, Shetland's annual Viking festival. Its obvious Norse connection is just one of many evident on the islands, and nearer to Norway than Edinburgh, there's a feeling here of individuality rather than perhaps any strong allegiance to Scotland. They're going it alone for the first time. The former Orkney and Shetland constituency split into two separate seats, a move it's hoped will convince islanders that their very specific needs will be better represented in Holyrood than they were in Westminster. The Northern Isles have been held by the Liberals since the 1950s, their longest tenure in Great Britain. But whether that'll continue in the new Shetland seat is certainly not a foregone conclusion. There's a general lack of interest in party politics on Shetland, which is reflected in the island's council, which is almost totally independent. Shetland has enjoyed relative prosperity since the 70s thanks to the Sullomvo oil terminal, but the industry's feeling the squeeze with oil prices extremely low. A huge number of jobs have gone at Sullomvo, and only if the new Atlantic frontier reserves are tapped will oil continue to be the island's major provider. As the oil industry declines, though, there is a return to some of the traditional industries, with the famous Shetland knitwear in particular enjoying new export orders. Farmed Shetland salmon was also making a name for itself on supermarket shelves at home and abroad, but the spread of the deadly infectious salmon anemia disease has devastated fish stocks. It's a crisis the local industry will be desperately looking towards the Scottish Parliament to help with. The Conservative's Gary Robinson was born and brought up on the islands and worked in the office equipment industry. He was heavily involved in the 1992 general election campaign on Orkney, going on to be appointed to the Shetland executive of the Scottish Conservative Party. He was also a major player in the local Think Twice campaign before the devolution referendum. Willie Ross is fighting the seat for the SNP. A civil engineer living on the islands, he joined the Nationalists in 1973 and has been involved with the local branch of the party since 1983. Willie Ross has served on the Galberwick and Cunningsborough Community Council for 10 years and is also Secretary of the Agricultural Show. The Liberal Democrat's Tavish Scott is a livestock farmer on the island of Bressay. Educated at Anderson High School in Lerwick and Edinburgh's Napier University, he was a researcher for Northern Isles MP Jim Wallace for 2 years at the end of the 80s. He went on to become a press officer with the party and since 1994 has been a councillor on Shetland Islands Council. Jonathan Wills is Labour's candidate. He joined the party in 1965 while studying geography at Edinburgh University and stood for the Northern Isles seat in the 2 general elections of 1974. Also a former Islands councillor, Jonathan Wills is a freelance writer, broadcaster and wildlife guide. He has also worked as a lighthouse boatman and college lecturer.
With transport a vital issue, it was appropriate that the 4 candidates joined me on board the St Clair ferry, which links Shetland with the mainland.
Gary, we always hear that Shetland is very different from the rest of Scotland. Do you think a parliament in Edinburgh will be of any more significance to the people here than one in Westminster?
I think the parliament in Edinburgh is still a long way away from us here in Shetland. We're actually nearer to Bergen here than we are to Edinburgh. So I think the Parliament will have to be judged on its actions and what it's actually going to do for Shetland. There is a great deal of scepticism as to what the Parliament can do. Many people I've spoken to have said, even still, that they see it's just going to be an extra cost, another layer of government.
For the nationalists, this must be quite worrying, isn't it? When you want to go as far as independence, and Shetland maybe don't even want devolution.
Oh, I don't think that's true. I think the vote in the referendum 2 years ago showed that Shetlanders are quite happy with devolution.
Marginally?
Marginally, yes. But I mean, that's a big sea change from the last referendum in 1979. And I think as I've been going round, I think there is a recognition in Shetland that we are poorly governed from Westminster. An awful lot of issues in Shetland, like our industries like fishing, farming, crofting, are badly governed from Westminster. And I think there's a recognition that the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh offers a new chance for Shetland to get on the map for a change.
Jonathan, you were going to stand as an independent. How can you now justify coming in as a traditional Labour candidate?
Well, I'm not going to go back over the Labour Party's internal disputes about who should be the candidate in Shetland, but we seem to have established that the candidate should be chosen by the local party, and I hope that will be observed nationally as well as in Shetland.
But it's not the local dispute, it's the policy.
I'm the official Labour Party candidate, and I am finding great enthusiasm for this Parliament on the doorsteps, because people see it as a way of bringing the Scottish office under more democratic, accountable control.
Tavish, do you think that Jonathan Wills can represent Shetland when he's already criticised the party that he's now standing for?
Well, I'm not here to comment on Jonathan Wills as a candidate. What I'm interested in doing is making sure this Parliament works, and works for the people of Shetland. I think across a vast range of issues, people in Shetland want to see progress and want to see positive action on issues like salmon, on issues like our transport links. Because we're sitting here on the St Clair, this is probably arguably the most important issue for the future of these islands, both in terms of sea links and in terms of air links. And I think Shetland wants and needs a very powerful representative in the new Scottish Parliament, very determined to make transport, salmon, fisheries and agriculture the issues which are at the forefront of the parliamentary decision-making process, and that's very much what Liberal Democrats will do both here in Shetland and I think it's strongly throughout the Highlands and Islands.
Transport is very important, yet the fuel tax, which probably is the single biggest problem here just now, will not be affected by the Scottish Parliament.
Well, the fuel tax can be affected by the Scottish Parliament, because if the Parliament takes a view on it as an issue and recognises the difficulties that we face in Shetland and throughout rural Scotland in terms of the extra cost of buying a litre of petrol in somewhere like Lerwick, I think the Parliament will say that's not a fair deal for the motorist. We all recognise the environmental...
But you can't change it.
Yeah, but can I just finish? I mean, we can change it in the sense that if the Parliament takes a very firm view on it right across the board, and there's cross-party agreement on the need to take action on it, they can then lobby the Westminster government in a positive relationship there. They can also accept the case that has been made that the UK member state can alter the VAT level on fuel and bring the level down to, shall I say, average mainland prices, and they can do that right across.
I've yet to see a way of doing that. I mean, I'm interested in differential taxation for the more remote areas of Scotland. I haven't yet seen a workable way of doing it, and certainly, as Tavish says, the new Parliament's going to have to look at that as part of its overall transport policy and how we do cushion the effect of higher fuel taxes. Higher fuel taxes are the policy of all the parties, and anybody who tells you
we need the political will,
otherwise
John. The important thing is the political will to tackle the problem of fuel prices. I think Jonathan's quite right about the transport points he makes, but we need the political will, and that's not there from the Labour Party at the moment.
Gary, the salmon farming industry is in crisis here. It's blighted by salmon anemia. What can be done?
Yeah, I think there's a great deal that could be done. I don't know exactly how, well, the salmon farmers know how much the government's current policy is failing. I'm a bit disappointed that the government aren't going to produce the report into their findings until after the Scottish Parliament elections. I think that might give some indication as to the damning criticism that's in it. But we certainly have taken a positive view in this. We want to work with the industry to overcome the problems and allow them to get compensation that they're currently being denied.
I have to interrupt you, Gary. I'm sorry, but I mean, that report has been published. It isn't normal to publish those reports during an election campaign. The government has offered £9 million to help solve this problem. Either we can eradicate this disease, or we can't. If we can't, we're going to have to live with it. The offer the government made was in terms that were not acceptable to the industry. Lord Sewell has said, well, let's sit down and talk about it again. This is a government that didn't cause this problem, but is trying to solve it. And I'm sure the Scottish Parliament is going to want
Jonathan,
going to have to do something much more urgently than before we meet.
The report that I'm talking about, Jonathan, is the Highlands and Islands Enterprise 1, which is critical of the government, and the government have sat on until after the Scottish Parliament.
But do you think Lord Sewell can bring the solution? I mean, you've already questioned his ability as a fisheries minister. If you're now going to serve under him, do you think he can come up with the solution?
I argue with John Sewell. I argue with many Labour colleagues. I mean, that's what the Labour Party is about, having a debate, an argument, a discussion. I think Lord Sewell has done his best to help the salmon farming industry. I'm not even sure there is a solution to this, and there are people in the salmon farming industry who've told me that in the last few days. They're seriously worried there may not be a solution.
There is a solution, and that's about a containment policy, because what's happening at the moment is that in Norway we have a position where they manage it as an industry problem, and then Norwegian salmon is allowed to be imported into the UK and into European markets. So they have a cost advantage both in terms of the price and in terms of the fact that they can put salmon into European markets while managing it in a different way than we have to in Shetland and indeed in the Scottish salmon industry.
That's true.
So that can happen if there's a commitment and a determination to take that through at a European level as part of a reform of European regulations. And I think the Scottish Parliament can play a role there, both in the representative office in Brussels, in making sure that we get a change in the European regulation.
But do you think the Scottish Parliament's going to be in tune enough with the needs of a rural economy like Shetland, which is suffering because of the decline in the oil industry just now, which has saved you from a lot of the economic ills in the past?
I think the Scottish Parliament will, because the Scottish Parliament will be a lot nearer and will listen. And many other parts of Scotland, not just Shetland, many parts of rural Scotland have the similar problems. The same issues are important: transport, the rural economy, the rural industries. The one concern I've got on issues like salmon farming, the problems in the salmon industry, not just the problem with ISA, but the problem with the price of salmon, largely due to the Norwegians flooding salmon into the EU at a ridiculously low price over the years. We had a Tory government which did nothing about it. We have a Labour government now which does nothing about it. My concern is that the Scottish Parliament won't have the teeth to do anything about it until we get full independence and the Scottish Parliament minister, Scottish Government minister, taking part in the EU councils and arguing properly for an industry which is very, very important to Scotland.
You won't get independence with the support of the people of Shetland, because it's quite clear the people of Shetland want to stay in the United Kingdom. And the SNP have got an even bigger hole in their budget than they think they have, because the oil is in Shetland and Orkney waters, and so is the fish. And the revenues from those public resources are staying with Britain if we stay with Britain.
But while we're on the subject of fisheries, I mean, the other three candidates here all support governments who have proposed some form of reform of the common fisheries policy, radical or otherwise. I noticed recently the Liberal Democrats started their campaign with the promise of radical reform. But in the most recent election correspondence, I noticed that radical reform has now become adjustments to the common fisheries policy. We say the common fisheries policy has not worked, it's not working, it's not going to work, it needs to go. It's the only way that we can salvage the Scottish fishing industry.
I must say, I think for the Conservatives to say anything on fisheries after 18 years of doing absolutely nothing about it is pretty rich, to be honest.
Yes.
What the Liberal Democrats say about the need for reform of the common fisheries policy is to give local fishermen much more control and much more influence in the way in which decisions are taken. We want to see regional management of fisheries, and the whole philosophy should be decentralisation of powers, decentralisation of the structures of reform of fisheries, so that local people can be involved in that, including all the stakeholders.
And Labour has started to deliver on that with the backing for the local shellfish management order. Unfortunately, some people are objecting to it, so it has to go to a public inquiry.
Right.
But that is the basis. There's cross-party agreement on this.
Apart from the Conservatives.
We want, well, are there parties?
We want local control. Well,
we want local control and management of sustainable fisheries, and that's Labour Party policy.
But how can you have equal access, how can you reform equal access to a common resource?
Well, you have to go to Brussels and talk about it.
Scotland's councils are also going to the polls on Thursday. As the electorate focuses on the first and second votes, will local government be disadvantaged, or could there be a record turnout? Christina McIntyre reports.
In the 6th of May.
Have your say in May, the slogan aimed at wooing the electorate to the ballot box in just over a week's time. But the advert mentions only 2 votes, both for the Scottish Parliament. No mention whatsoever of vote number 3, which will elect this year's local councillors. The SNP describes the omission as crass. The Nationalists are fielding a record number of candidates at local level and dispute the claim that the best will be trying for the Scottish Parliament, leaving a melee of also-rans chasing town hall glory.
I think what's important is the quality of candidates. For example, in Glasgow, we've had a very rigorous vetting process. 37 candidates failed the vetting process in Glasgow, whereas the Labour Party failed absolutely no one who went forward for that. So what we're basically saying is that even if people have been SNP activists for 10, 20, 30 years, that doesn't entitle them to an SNP council candidate. We're looking for the best people if we're going to be delivering the best services.
The vast majority of Scottish local authorities are Labour-controlled, with only a handful ruled by the SNP and Liberal Democrats. In the Lib Dems case, it's a matter of co-rule with independent councillors. The Scottish Conservatives, however, are at the helm of none. The Listening Party, as has been its theme since the last general election, is bidding for its first scalp. The Tories claim local authorities must maintain their autonomy.
We're very concerned that the left-wing parties, which basically is everybody else, although I think Labour is shifting a bit to the right of us on some issues, are centralist parties. They want to pull things back and will only let things go at a gentle pace to suit themselves. Now that is a great danger and a risk to democracy. We're a party that believes very much in making decisions locally available to people. We need to have local services designed locally, accountable locally, with decisions made locally, and the Parliament should enable that to happen.
The Liberal Democrats' approach is somewhat contrasting. Rather than give local authorities carte blanche to spend their millions, they believe a tighter rein should be kept on them by the new Scottish Parliament.
We feel we can act in partnership, that the Scottish Parliament can use its committee structure to have strong regional committees which will cooperate with councils, help them to do good things, give them more freedom to do enterprising things, but monitor what they're doing, set standards and priorities, and make sure that they do deliver.
North Lanarkshire Council hit the headlines last year when a deficit of more than £5 million was uncovered in its direct labour organisation. Central government was quick to condemn the huge financial blunder. Public confidence in the town hall was greatly dented. But North Lanarkshire's not alone in the red. Across the country there have been debts of more than £10 million recorded in local councils. Now each political party has to convince the electorate that it and it alone is capable of running a tight ship at local level.
There are problems that we need to tackle. We're tackling them in the DLOs. We're also going to make sure that we have an ethical code put forward to the new Parliament to improve standards. The Macintosh Commission will soon report on electoral reform and the way that councils work. So there will be significant changes, but I believe that we've got a good foundation to build upon. But as far as Labour's concerned, there's absolutely no complacency whatsoever.
The Scottish public is notoriously disinterested in local politics, despite being critical of council services and council tax, and many simply don't bother to vote in council elections. This time round, things should be different. With vast numbers at the ballot box to elect the new MSPs, surely they'll spend a few more seconds and also use vote number 3 to choose a councillor.
I think I'll be rethinking my voting this year.
I know the government one's on the 6th of May for the Scottish Government. I know that, but as far as the local council, I haven't a clue.
I don't know much about politics, honestly. It's a thing I don't really get involved in.
I think the public regard local government generally as a bit of a joke. They equate it with inefficiency, cronyism, self-serving people. It couldn't be lower, actually.
Do you not think the electorate is looking for guarantees that their particular local authority will be run correctly, the books will be balanced and there will not be sleaze?
There's a feeling in the public that they want their local council to be virtually non-political. They want it simply to work and deliver the service. They're not really interested in all the alleged sleaze and the political crossfire that takes place. They simply want it to work. They take a very pragmatic view of their local council.
And And that brings us to the end of this pre-election programme. Join Bernard Ponsonby and I on Thursday at 10 o'clock for Vote 99, Scotland Decides, with the results as they happen across the country. Till then, a very good night to you.